Welcome to episode 208 of Silver Lining for Learning. I am joined by my co-hosts, Punya Mishra from Arizona State, Yang Zhao from the University of Kansas and the University of Melbourne, and three guests from the National AI Institute on AI student teaming. And I just want to say a couple words about why I'm excited about this episode and to provide some context for this idea of National AI Institutes. NSF currently has 27 funded National AI Institutes. They just added two that deal with astronomy. The majority of the institutes are directed towards a particular set of use cases. So there are institutes that focus on agriculture, there are institutes that focus on aging, some focus on just AI and foundational AI. And there are 5 institutes that focus on education. I'm the Associate Director for Research for one of the 5 that is the only one that is not pre-college. Ours deals with workforce reskilling and upskilling, and that comes down into higher education in terms of workforce preparation. But the other 4 are all going to be on Silver Lining for Learning. Last week, we had episode 207 with an institute that looks at beliefs and dispositions that students bring to academic learning. And this week, we have the inaugural institute that was funded by NSF before any of the others, which you'll hear about in terms of what they deal with. But these are great resources for the field because they're not trying to make money selling things. They're not trying to overhype AI. They know that there was AI before generative AI and have many people who are experienced in that area. And so they provide an access to reliable information, which is in short supply, frankly, in a lot of discussions about AI and education. So I'll ask each of our guests to introduce themselves and talk about the Institute. And Thomas, we'll start with you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having us. My name is Thomas Breideband. I'm the Associate Director for ISAT, which stands for the Institute for Student AI Teaming. My background is, broadly speaking, in the digital humanities, with also like a little bit branching out into team science. And I joined ISAT kind of in the 3rd year, and I focused mostly on the design or the front-end design of one of our inaugural AI partners. And I'm very excited to talk about the work that we've been doing over the last few years. Let me hand it over to Bill.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Penuel, and I'm on faculty in the School of Education and the Institute of Cognitive Science at the University of Colorado. These days, much of my work outside of ISAT focuses on science curriculum development. A big team I led just completed a full 3-year free course of study in biology, chemistry, and physics aligned to the next generation science standards called OpenSciEd. And before coming to CU, which is kind of relevant to this conversation, I directed evaluation research at the Center for Technology and Learning in SRI International in Menlo Park, California. And I'm so lucky to be reconnecting to a lot of work there in this project that our teams worked on in terms of collaborative learning and how technology can support collaborative learning. And I'll turn it over to Mai.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. My name is Mai Vu. I work over at the Innovation Center in St. Lorraine Valley School District, located in Longmont, Colorado. I am the AI Program Manager. Just give you a little bit about my background. My actual formal studies was I was an attorney, and then I transitioned to be a teacher. And what I started doing was I was teaching computer science. And then, as you know, this then eventually morphed into teaching kids about AI. And I was lucky enough to be asked to be on the team with ISAT. And so at St. Verrain, we have a cohort of teachers, and we work with the ISAT team to help create some curriculum, and I think we'll get more into that, but that's my journey. Thank you.
Well, it's great of the three of you to make time to be with us today. One of the things I really like about ISAT is that it is not only focused on doing things better, but it's focused on doing better things. So much of AI in education that I read about and hear about is essentially automating the industrial model of education. And I don't want to be too critical about that, because that's important and there are strengths that AI can bring. But the opportunities to do something new and better, I think, are under-resourced and neglected somewhat in the discussions about AI. And I know that, for example, one of the things that keeps teachers from doing more active learning in classrooms is the complexities of managing active learning. You've got 10 student groups, they're each in a different place. How do you know which group to go to next? And how do you have some kind of insight about what you might do when you get there? So I'd love you to talk in particular about the sort of doing better things side of the ISAT. And any of you, please jump in on that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's really an exciting time we're living in, where we have the opportunity to maybe move past the paradigm of individual optimization of learning and pursue more the tenets of collaborative learning, which, as is true, is very difficult to juggle for a teacher in the classroom. I also remember in the extensive co-design sessions and iterative development of our AI partners, one thing that kind of came up frequently from teachers is, if they could pick just one superpower, it would be to be either omnipresent or to clone themselves so that they could be at every table at all times. And so what we're trying to accomplish are developing the kinds of tools that can augment, that can enrich the learning experience for groups, so that the teacher so that these eureka moments, these gold nuggets, these moments of positive learning, active learning, are somewhat captured, so that the teacher has a resource to talk with students expansively about these kinds of things.
One of the things that I love about our center that I think is really different is that we don't start with the question of what can AI do, but we ask the question about what kind of future do we want, and what do we want AI to be able to support us in helping bring about that future. And you mentioned, Chris, the idea of kind of managing groups, and that is like very much our origin story. And we all thought that is the problem to solve with respect to collaborative learning. And it certainly is a big problem. But one of the things that we did when we put together very early on in our project some learning futures workshops with young people out in the Bay Area during the height of the pandemic, we had these long engagements on Zoom with young people. And we asked them to start thinking with us about, what do you want for collaborative learning? And they initially came up with the exact same things that we did. We want something that'll help people keep on track. And then we said, do you want that for yourself? And they're like, no way. I'd throw that AI, I'd chuck it off the table right away. I'd turn it off. And it took actually a few tries for us to like find the right way to help young people imagine a different way of collaboration than they were used to in schools. And what was a real breakthrough was when our postdoctoral scholar, Michael Chang, who's now at BU, brought a group of young people. This was after the pandemic now is settled and you could bring people places. He brought them to a housing co-op that he lived at. And they saw a set of rules on the refrigerator or community agreements. And then they learned that there was a person in charge of that, about helping them navigate and negotiate all the rules of what it would mean to live together. And they're like, wait, this is really cool. Maybe this is something that we might like too. And that really shifted our gears. It didn't take us away from the idea that collaboration's hard to manage and can't we do that, but it also gave us a whole different vision for a possible future, a way to do better things, Chris, as you were saying.
I think what this also touches upon are these very persistent types of institutional gravity that are exerted on students, like the way how to do things, how to learn. And what we're trying to accomplish, and that's one thing that I find so remarkable, is that we're really finding ways of elevating agency among students. So with what Bill mentioned, this idea of living together and coming up with agreements is very a bottom-up approach of developing forms of ideal collaborations. They're not top-down. They're not handed to a classroom of kids from a teacher, at the start of a year, to make sure that we're all being respectful with one another. No, it's a very co-negotiated, consensus-based experience for students, and I think that's very, very powerful. And tapping into that is very rewarding experience. Mai, do you want to add a little bit to it?
Yes. First of all, I have to tell you, from a teacher's perspective, I was skeptical. I was like, what are we doing? What are we building? Right? What is it that we're doing? But I have to say that after working with the ISAT team, it has really opened my eyes to the possibility and to the phenomenal stuff that's going on there. So one of the things that you start off with is getting the classroom norms. And I just think it's just such a really unique way that they've introduced this with Kobe and how teachers can learn from this. Because I mean, I think you said it right from the start, is like, how can teachers be at every single group everywhere, right? So that's kind of like the domain of teachers. And with this tool, I think it's quite helpful. And not only that, the kids are checking themselves. And I think that's really refreshing to see how kids are interacting with this. And I really love how CU Boulder has thought about this from a kid's perspective in terms of integrating this tool. And not only that, we, as being part of the cohort, we are able to see, like, peek underneath the hood how these things work. So not only that are they building the tool, but we get to see how AI works, and we're kind of they're helping us kind of demystify some of the tools and some of the lingos that the kids see. And that's just been such a powerful tool for us, because as a teacher, I'm not a professional at this, AI, to everybody's point, I never knew AI existed until November 30th, 2022, right? That was a day that was released, right? And so now everybody is like on the bandwagon of this AI. And as the more and more I've learned about this, AI has been around for such a long time, right? But from a teacher's perspective, that's what got everybody's notice and attention. And again, I just really like to just commend the team at ISAT to building such a wonderful tool to help us teachers and students learn more about AI.
Thank you. So, Mai, this is actually a perfect segue to what I wanted to learn a little bit more about. So, and this is sort of a replay of a question that I asked at the last episode. And partly it's because our audience is very diverse. We have people who are deeply enmeshed in AI, and we have people who, are sort of like, okay, what is this ChatGPT and what am I supposed to do with it? And what's a large language model kind of a thing. Plus, I think, as Chris rightly said, and a couple of you have reiterated, that there is a much longer history to AI than the current sort of hype around it or the talk around it, starting with 2 years ago, approximately. So maybe you could speak a little bit to, one, how are you guys defining AI? Because there are many different variations of that, so that people can get a better understanding of that. And how are you responding to, now that the world has gone batshit nuts about this thing called AI, And that's actually both a good and a bad thing for people who are working in that space. It's great because suddenly everybody's interested in you. I'm sure this episode will get a lot of viewers just because the word AI is in the title, more so than, let's say, 2 years ago, right? But at the same time, it comes at a certain risk as well, because there are, I think, certain fundamental misunderstandings of what these large language models can do, what other forms of AI can be, which are more sort of top-down, sort of programmed kind of systems, intelligent systems, and so on. And so maybe get a little bit of sort of from you about how are you thinking about AI? How are you dealing with this maelstrom that has sort of erupted around you? And particularly I'd be really interested to hear from you. And you sort of alluded to that already, that how do you see this hype and rhetoric and all of that playing out in the actual classroom context? So, because if you're expecting your AI to be the super smart, answer everything, get everything right, and then the tools we have, even large language models don't even come close to that. So what happens when that hype meets reality kind of a thing? And I'm just curious to hear that. So that's a long-winded question. So how are you thinking about AI? How are you dealing with this hype and how is it playing out in the classroom?
Yeah, these are all great questions. And quite frankly, this is what I think about every day. Like a little every day before I go to bed, like I think about these things all the time because that's what I have to deal with, right? So I'm going to start off with how I'm thinking about AI. So first, I want to talk about in the classroom and then as a system. Okay, so I will talk about in my classroom. So in my classroom, right, there is teaching with AI and teaching about AI. So I am more focused because I teach high school kids about AI and how to demystify AI. So the first thing is you got to play with it. And so one of the first things when they get into my class is I ask them we learn how to use large language models like ChatGPT because that's free for them, right? And so we work on that. And the first thing I ask them to do is create a contract on how you're going to use ChatGPT in my classroom. But I ask them to use ChatGPT to help create the contract, right? And then so the reason why I choose such a very dry topic is that you can see how large language models work in the sense that it's very dry, it's very generic, right? And then from there, the kids play with what's my voice into this? And that's the thing that I keep asking them is when you play with these things, where's your voice in this when you use this language model? And then on top of that, now that I've shown them how to use this stuff, my expectations for them are actually very high in the sense that I expect perfection from them, right? In the sense, do not give me any grammar mistakes. Do not give me any misspelling mistake. It is there for you, right? It is a tool for you to collaborate. So that's one of the things that I deal with that in terms of that. Next, the things that I'm thinking about in terms of this is I think we have to teach kids more about critical thinking. And so, and what worries me even more is that now you've got a release of the Strawberry, 01 preview, is that you have the ability for kids to reason. And so what I wonder and what I'm wondering about is where is the productive struggle for kids? Right. And so that's where I'm thinking about, like, when do you introduce this in terms of their acquisition for things? And so that's one thing that I wonder about. And then another thing is I teach them about hallucinations, right? When people talk about the hype of AI, they don't talk about the ability that it can hallucinate. And so we ask the kids to be very critical about that. And so that was one of the things another thing that I'm wondering about is in education, what amount of hallucination is tolerable? We don't know yet, right? No one's asked, no one's thought about that in terms of, because everybody, when they test, like when they test these large language models, they talk about accuracy. But when you have kids who are relying on this, because now you have the push for tutoring, right? You have a lot of people pushing for tutoring. How much of hallucination is tolerable, and how do we check on that? Because that's really LLMs are about the probability of the next thing, right? That's how I kind of look at it in terms of my classroom is having kids have critical thinking and being skeptical about these tools, right? These tools are out there. Be skeptical about it. And that's the fun thing. And I want to quote Ethan Mollick in the sense that this is the worst model they'll ever have, right? So I'm looking at Gen Alphas right now. And when they become adults in the real world, how are they going to use and apply this? And of course, we talk about ethics, and we talk about those things. But I also want to just highlight that's just me, the individual teacher in the classroom. I just want to highlight our St. Verraine's work in terms of a system, looking at AI as a system. So what they've done is they have gone out and they've had a lot of teacher PD to help teachers. They first started off with playing with AI, right? So you have to play with this tool to understand how this tool works in the classroom. And so some of the things is, we created stuff like, hey, why don't you make a itinerary for yourself just to go travel? Nothing, like, oh, let's make a classroom. Let's, get some stuff for the kids, right? So we wanted to focus on the teachers first, because once the teachers can play with the tool to see what it can actually do, I think you'll see that infused into how they do it in the classroom. And then, so that was last year. So for this year now, they're going to dive deeper into like, how can you really use AI as a partner in your classroom? And then they've looked at it from everybody that can be helped within the school system. For example, the classified staff, the teachers, the admins, like they've looked at that. And so I'm really proud of the work we've done in terms of looking at AI from a systems point of view.
Thank
I
you.
think there's a couple of, like, I just want to pick out a few things that Maya's mentioned, because it's just like wonderful, like, to work directly like with all of our stakeholders and design in co-designing these kind of like from the bottom up. But what I want to pick out was student voice, critical reasoning, critical thinking. And if you want to plug AI in and you want to move away from this very kind of established model of individual optimization, then you have to like come up with a new vision, like a vision to reframe the role of AI in education that is more expansive, that moves away from that current emphasis of intelligent tutoring, but supporting more kind of rich socio-collaborative interaction. So the vision that ISAT pursues is to think of AI as a social collaborative partner, something that can intelligently participate in conversation with small groups of students, that can facilitate a sense of belonging and supporting students when they might get stuck in groups, at other times nimbly kind of like helping, making suggestion for knowledge construction. So it's a space that AI can inhabit, that does not replace the teacher, because we want them to be able to do what they do best, like create rich learning experiences for students, but AI that can augment these experiences. And that also has to go along with things, and Mai touched upon this briefly, this idea of explainability and transparency that we also really pursue. I'm always reminded of, I'm not going to kind of like give specifics, but like a conversation during a panel that I overheard, where you can really see how a corporate mindset, and of course, we're in an academic setting, so it's a really exciting time for us to think of our development of AI tools to be a meaningful, an important counterpoint to maybe a corporate mindset around AI that really has like that corporate imperative that guides this whole decision making. And for us, it's more about like a grassroots, bottom up, co-designing with students and with teachers, the kinds of tools that help us reframe the role of AI in education, and to augment or to make possible collaborative learning curricula that maybe in the past were difficult to orchestrate, but with AI, they can become more and more of a reality. And we have several collaborative learning curricula we've developed where our AI partners can meaningfully enrich these experiences, so that students do not consider the AI tools that we have as something that evaluates their performance or their growth in class, but that are designed to enrich the co-construction of knowledge that happens in these collaborative learning groups. And Bill, I think I want to hand it over to you with regarding our collaborative learning curricula.
Yeah. I wanted to take up Punya's ask too, specifically around kind of what corner of AI are we building on? There's a long history of work in computer-supported collaborative learning that focuses on group awareness tools, and two kinds of awareness, or the cognitive states. Where is this group? What's going on in this group? And we have tools that we're working on for that, and also social awareness tools, which the community builder tool that Thomas will demo a little bit later, I think, And so there's a rich tradition of work on those tools. What's distinct is that so many of those tools have been developed in higher ed space for online environments where it's relatively, it's not easy. I don't want to say that, but we're tackling some harder problems. Like, how do you listen in a noisy classroom? How do you think about dynamics where there's an AI partner and then real humans in real time having to actually interact with one another? And as Thomas said, what we're trying to do, I think, which is quite distinctive, is support a vision of STEM learning that is around collaborative knowledge building in the moment. And, thinking about how, especially in science education, we talk about, the goal is having kids be able to work together to figure out phenomena in the natural world using science ideas and science practices. And that is deeply collaborative work. So
Thank
Thomas
you.
oh, go ahead.
No,
Yeah.
this is very helpful. And I
You
was
can interrupt, yeah.
waiting. Just one quick comment. So my talking about the hallucination and Thomas, building on what you said about it being a partner, one of the things that I often say is that having these large language models is like having a smart, drunk, occasionally biased intern with me all the time. And if you see it that way, it actually is super useful. So it's a question of how do you frame it rather than like this oracle of truth or whatever it may be. But I know Young's been waiting, so Zhao, go ahead.
Well, thank you. This is quite exciting. Last month, I was running a summer camp in China for 13, 14, 15-year-olds, and we used the AI. The summer camp, the main idea is part of a program I've been developing. It's called Innovation, Creativity, Entrepreneurship Education. So we had students from Australia and from China, and for about 8 days, this kid's job is to turn a public park into an educational space so they can do whatever they like. So they work with AI as a partner. We use large language models, and we had 2 AI guys to program for us, trapping all the data students used. We did surveys, interviews of teachers. Interesting, the teachers from Australia and the US, we also had TAs, RAs, a huge group, about 200 people. I was there all the time. So a couple of things I will observe that I really want to chat with you guys about. Number one is the students' exploration with the emotional, psychological side with AI. That's quite amazing. That's I don't think that's been talked a lot about. Is children really trying to understand what AI can do. They said, well, my mother said this about me, but what do you think? And they ask AI to write love stories, to do movies. They're really exploring the broad side of AI. That's quite interesting to us. Another thing that's interesting is that they want to push the limit. Kids, they are not doing a real job. They want to push the limit. They type in emoji and hope AI will do something. It's really kind of funny. That is kind of interesting. Another thing is that we really build teams around AI, so that each person would go to the AI, seek information, do something, then they come back to work in teams against that. So that's a design. So I was actually wondering about several things. So what you guys are thinking about, all of you. First of all, I was really thinking about the value, Bill, especially coming to you, of curriculum. Because as I think Chris was talking a lot about doing better things. I think one of the things, at least this is my personal view, I've been talking about this for all my life, is I really think all curriculum have limitations for students. It may work for some students, it won't work for others, that's for sure. And the same thing, I think, as Mai was talking about hallucination. In some cases, hallucination are not more than in some other cases. So I was just wondering, Bill, in regard to the curriculum, how flexible it is, or how reasonable, because Thomas was talking about co-design curriculum with students. Our theoretical framework in running the camp, our research, is what we call the co-evolution of students with AI. So how AI evolves and how students evolve in their cognitive and social psychological abilities and think about that. So really the big one is the curriculum, and then with the curriculum, you pedagogy goes with that as well. So like in teaching, how much practice you're flexible with the pedagogy. A third one really relates to how much autonomy do you give students to truly explore and develop their competency or literacy with AI?
These are fantastic questions. So in terms of specific things, how I approach it is that, you know, as these AIs get better and better, these kids still need to understand the fundamental things, like what is the difference between AI versus machine learning, right? So we assume that the kids know how to use the stuff, but they don't understand the underlying things that build it, right? And so then we go build models. You know, we use things like teachable machine and things like that, so as kids can understand, so that they don't get the feeling that AI is AGI, right? Right now we don't have AGI, and then for them, I want them to be kind of like have a lot of critical thinking about this. And so we have to test some of this stuff. So that was one of the questions you asked. Another thing that I also want to say is I am critical about this, but there are lots and lots of benefits to AI, right? And how we use this. And I want to make sure that's it. And especially for kids with new neurodiversity, right? And so we always think about the kids who are like the higher end kids, but what about the kids that can really use AI and to be a partner to help them? You know, and so I often try to do that. And so getting back to your point in terms of how much kids are, we actually try to do projects. And so one of the things that we do is we're actually going to compete in the World AI Youth Competition called WACI. And so what's interesting about that is, if you haven't heard of that, they have 4 different tracks. They have a track on kind of like AI for good. And so that's kind of like their showcase track. They have one where they ask the kids how to use the LLM to be like a sales agent or to have some body of knowledge, and to demonstrate how they do that. There's another track on generative art. And then now there's another track on creating, using AI to create videos. So within those things, the kids kind of get to pick and choose about that. So, yeah.
So, you asked about kind of curriculum, and I wanted to say something we haven't said so far, which is that all of the AI are being, Thomas alluded to it, but I wanted to be real clear. One of the things that's novel about our approach is that all of our particular AI partners are intended to be used within a set of units that teach about AI. And they teach about how things work, also offer opportunities to try to create AI applications, and also to critique them. So as an example, we have units on self-driving cars and one on online moderation. And I'll just go into a little bit of depth into the online moderation one. That particular unit starts with a young Black girl who goes onto a public Minecraft server, and she experiences harms related to her race and her gender. Then her father is writing about this story, and her father finds her a public Minecraft server that's run by LGBTQ members of that community, and has a very different experience. And kids then, this launches, they pose a set of questions that launch into a unit that asks about how can AI and humans partner to create inclusive gaming and other kinds of online communities. So kids' questions actually drive this, but we do have unit lessons written out, and we have a model of curriculum development called storylines that we use. And storylines are basically are an approach that is such that their goal is to create a unit that's coherent from the student point of view, as well as relevant to their everyday lives. And kids have a lot of experience with online communities at this point, and they're bringing all sorts of everyday experiences that we're then using that unit to kind of bridge to AI concepts. And in that unit, we start out with Eliza. We take them through the history of different AI applications and get them into how can we actually tell between harmful words and words that are meant to be uplifting in gameplay. So we're getting into that affect that you're talking about, Like kids are really engaging with it. And they also get to experience how hard it is to train an AI to recognize words that are either positive or negatively have negative valence to them and see where these things can fail. And so that's a big part of what we try to do. We also really encourage through our professional learning, because this is a big challenge for us. You've got, in a sense, a triple innovation or challenge, as my colleague Monica Ko says. We have to introduce new pedagogy in the form of the storyline curriculum, new content, because for many people, teachers, they didn't learn about AI in their teacher preparation programs. And we're integrating AI together. So in our professional learning, we're having to attend to all those learning needs. But also because AI isn't in the standard US curriculum, we have to allow and build in time for adaptation of all of our curriculum units for teachers to be able to do that so that it fits the standards that they're required to teach. So we have a very intensive professional learning that lasts a week, and we provide online ongoing support for them. And that's a big part, a central part of what it takes for us to introduce this new AI into classrooms.
I'd like to build on, Bill, on what you've said and to talk about something we haven't covered yet. And that is that far too often outsiders come to teachers and students in schools with a deficit model. And they say, you're in trouble, but I'm from Harvard and I'm here to help you, or something equivalent to that. And of course, you're dead on arrival if you show up with that kind of message. You need to come humbly, you need to come to listen, you need to come in the spirit of empowering what teachers and students want to do as opposed to what you want them to do. And Bill has been a leader in a movement called design-based implementation research that I and many others have participated in. And I think that's been important in your institute, because without the partnerships with students and teachers, you can't do what you want to do. So I'd love you to talk a little bit about that, Bill, even though it's not directly about AI. It predates AI.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think it's key for us being able to pose the question the way we do of what kind of futures do we want and what can AI do that? You have to have partners in partnerships in place, and they require quite a bit of ongoing maintenance because one of the things that happened in the middle of our partnership is the explosion of ChatGPT and generative AI. And so we've really had to adapt as people are now newly aware of capabilities, but also concerns, right? So these are things that are important that for us to be really take into account at all stages. I think one thing that, Chris, that I've been reflective about is that the internal partnerships within the Institute have been equally important. How we went from a workshop with young people to then thinking about what is the collaborative work that needs to happen among learning scientists, among folks who study collaborative and team learning, among AI scientists, that will then turn this into something that people can use and then continue to iterate and get feedback from folks like Mai on our product as it's evolving. So I think that's a lesson for me, Chris, as I would say, is yeah, the partnerships have been a foundation, but I would say equally true that is difficult is how do you then translate, these kids are saying these things, how do we turn that into an application in a classroom? And like in research practice partnerships, I always say you've got to walk 80% of the way across that bridge and we had some really great boundary spanners internally. So Michael Chang was one of those key boundary spanners. He started off as a computer science. He came to us as a postdoc, and suddenly he was the guy who was helping to translate within the partnership or within our institute. So yes, partnerships have been foundational, and so has the internal collaboration that we've been able to pull off.
So I'm going to jump in here a little bit. I know, Thomas, it'd be interesting for our viewers and listeners to actually see some of the, products that you've been working on, because it's one thing to talk in the abstract and one thing to either see or listen to somebody describing it. So I think you have sharing privileges. So if you don't mind, that would be useful. And maybe, is there a tool that is being used right now in classrooms?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so that'd be great if maybe you can follow up with a brief sort of description of how this is actually playing out. So
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I just want to kind of quickly say to like add on to what Bill said is like having these expensive partnerships and tying this also to the meteoric rise of ChatGPT and how it permeates everything, that we're also recognizing through our work that we're not just dealing with like students and teachers or educators, broadly speaking, but we're also now considering much more parents, because parents are also the ones who play such an important role in that whole universe, especially when it comes to how we see the future of AI in education. And so we're also conducting workshops and co-design sessions with parents to understand their hopes and their dreams and their fears around AI, because especially when you conduct research with AI, then of course you also bring in the parents and their parents' perspective, and also to imagine the Institute as a nexus for these kinds of questions through like workshops, community events, opening our doors, showing how the work is done, all in the spirit of like transparency, explainability, basically white boxing the whole experience, moving away from a black boxing. But when it comes to our inaugural AI partner, and it's called the Community Builder, COBE, and Bill already touched a little bit on this, how this whole thing started. It started during a Learning Futures workshop where kids came across the Community Builder in a co-op space, and we started thinking about how can kids in a classroom come up, co-negotiate their community agreements around their ideal collaborations. So COBE is basically a web application, a web interface. It runs on Chromebooks that are usually sitting on the table of student groups, and it's split into 3 phases. The first phase is a simple inputting interface where individual student groups can brainstorm ideas about community agreements. And we are splitting these into 4 categories: being committed to community, being respectful, moving our thinking forward, and being equitable. And the first step is that a teacher facilitates these like brainstorming sessions where individual group come up with their own examples, and then they come back together and they pool their ideas to create what we could call like a class-wide set of agreements that should guide their collaborations. And when they then work together, we use, and I think what COBE kind of does is it puts the A in STEAM and creates kind of like adds a creative, expansive idea around AI with a data visualization that in its default version showcases a growing tree animation with individual flowers that pop up when COBE thinks that it has noticed an example, an expression of it being committed to community or being respectful. For instance, when a student in a small groups says to another student, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Or I think this was a really great idea. These could be these nuggets, these moments that COBE is able to pick up and preserve and put as flowers color-coded on the tree to identify these community agreements. And then once the collaborative activity is concluded, the teacher then has several ways of socializing these results that COBE provides. The visual feedback that's aggregated to the classroom level to protect student privacy. And what we provide are discussion prompts to not to have the kids in small groups impute collaboration skills as part of completing a collaborative activity, but to really explicitly talk about collaboration as a skill by way of making sense of these different types of visualizations. So for instance, there is a revisiting routine around celebrating the community with a discussion prompt and sentence starters that students could use to make sense of what they're seeing. Another revisiting routine, and that shows a different kind of visualization here. It's not a growing tree animation. It's a radar chart along the community agreements that we can represent at this point, is about what do you notice or wonder about the radar. It's all kind of, it lives on the classroom level to protect student privacy and to allow to help foster these expansive conversations around collaboration. And what we have here is a little bit of an attempt of like popping the hood of COBE and showing some of the utterances that COBE is confident it categorized correctly as an example of a community agreement, so that then the kids can look at it and they can see how well the AI system is doing, and then they learn also the affordances and limitations of AI. So it's a broad way of providing visual feedback for kids as a resource, so that a teacher can meaningfully lead conversations around community agreements and the classroom's adherence to community agreements as a way of fostering collaborative reflection, collective accountability, social and group awareness.
Right.
And we've tested it. The first version was pilot tested last year in the spring. We currently have a second version that's been tested. And what's really remarkable in our early testing is the awe and surprise of having an AI system. And that's, I think, one thing that is so important in particular as the kids are learning about AI and AI systems, is that they are the ones feeding COBE. They're the ones providing the data. It's not that they're looking at some external example of an AI system, but they're they're creating these visualizations as they're working together. And what's also remarkable, of course, is that if a classroom comes up with their own agreements, then from one class to the next, you can have a whole different set of agreements. So it really puts responsibility and accountability into the hands of the students, but at the same time, creating a visualization that is non-evaluative, that is non-threatening, that is not about being punitive. Interestingly enough, I remember during interviews, short, brief interviews we would also have with some of the kids in classrooms, is that they were wondering about a growing tree. Would it also be possible for the leaves to wither and die? And that was a bit, I have to admit, that was a bit stunning to hear, but it kind of reinforces these institutional gravities that are also about the idea of community, of transgressions of norms. But we made kind of a decision of not pursuing kind of a punitive, evaluative route with our visualizations, but to present them as conversation starters, as an ability for a teacher and with her students to take the pulse of the learning community and to make tangible and graspable what we call the social dimension of collaboration, as alongside, in parallel, as important as the cognitive processes that happen when students complete an activity. And one thing that I find also remarkable is that teachers are taking COBE in all different kinds of ways. So it has some flexibility in how teachers like to orchestrate these experiences with COBE. For example, we had teachers who instruct or give instruction before collaborative activities to ask their students to focus on one agreement in particular to see if they can, for instance, put more flowers of a certain color on a tree, to see how much they can maybe game the system or break the system. These are things that students were actively engaged in. I remember one thing that was remarkable is that one of the students in one classroom would lean in very closely to the microphone and repeat, "Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you," or "I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you," in order to feed COBE and just see if their actions affect the feedback. So it's an exciting way to see how it is nimble enough to allow the teachers to take COBE in different kinds of ways, all in the universe of the social experience of collaboration. And Mai, can you say a little bit about your experience with your students?
We started on this adventure 4 years ago, and I have to tell you, this has been such a wonderful journey for us. So one of the things that Thomas was alluding to was collecting information. So one of the curriculum that the team has built is something called sensor immersion. It is a phenomenal curriculum, and so what the kids do is they learn how to use sensors using the microbit. And if you haven't tried that, I'd highly recommend that you check it out. And it's wonderfully how they've guided the teachers in terms of how to do this. And so that was one of the bases from a teacher's point of view, is that not all teachers are comfortable with computational thinking. And so that curriculum kind of like set the foundation for us with that. And so from there, they collected the data from in terms of group learning. And so one of the things that Bill had alluded to is something really cool that the team at CU has built, which is how classrooms are noisy by nature. And especially when you have group project, right? And so one of the technical things that they did was how are they able to pick out these certain voices within each of the groups. And so I applaud them for that. The next thing that I thought was really cool was when you have this in the classroom, the kids really do want to, and the team has built just wonderful visualization for the kids to see how they're doing. And so one of the things that is really difficult in AI is the idea of explainability and transparency. And that's something that's been built into Kobe that the kids can see, right? Because the kids can see how ChatGPT works, but for a company called OpenAI, nothing's open about it, right? But here at CU, they've built such a wonderful tool where the kids can really, really see and interact with the explainability and the transparency of that. But not only that, it actually moves their thinking forward in terms of, okay, what's next? What's next? Okay, so what do we need to do? And by the end of this unit, all the kids know how to use the sensors and then how it can then affect in their daily lives. So I really, the kids and I and the teachers have enjoyed learning about that and learning how this process works.
So I want to raise one more issue that I think is important, that centers around measurement and assessment. So these are research institutes, and you're dealing with variables and constructs that are notoriously difficult to measure. But of course, AI also opens up new methods of measurement, especially with natural language processing, that again are very exciting frontiers, but that people are not really taking full advantage of at this point. And then assessment, um, I think it's safe to say that the full impact of what students get from your interventions is not going to be seen in psychometric high-stakes summative tests, right? These are really performances, in a sense, that students are learning, and there are also shifts in beliefs and dispositions that are really important for success in life. So I'd love to hear you talk a bit about how you're approaching the issue of research measurement and how you're making suggestions to schools and teachers about how they might assess what is coming out of this work.
I'm happy to jump in on this one. It's a great question, Chris, and we're doing so in a couple of different contexts. We have both some laboratory studies and also some classroom studies. We're at this place where I think it's important to have both kinds of studies because of the variabilities in the classroom and the variabilities in frankly being able to accurately hear in the classroom. That really, it helps us to be able to have both contexts. One thing that we're doing, and I know this is a longstanding interest of yours, is really drawing on some powerful learning analytics that are automatic. So the Sun et al. Collaborative problem solving framework underlies some automatic analysis that's happening that's actually going into the Kobe trees, right? And so we're using that as one of our particular assessment frameworks. Sorry, our dog just is announcing the arrival of our guest.
And it's funny because my dog is hearing this and his ears up. He was getting ready to go out, and now he's like, "Oh, I've got a friend in here." So it's hilarious.
If we can,
Sorry.
maybe we should just hit pause for a second because he's going to go until Barry gets in the I'm not going to be able to say anything and have you hear me.
But this is actually illustrating the point that you raised about being able to
It's
disentangle
true. It's
meaning in a
actually true.
complex
It's actually
auditory
true.
environment.
I can try to speak over, and you'll let me know if you can make sure we can hear. I know it does. Zoom tunes things out a little bit. So one of the things that we're doing also is, so in addition to that, in addition to the CPS, we also want to know how kids perceive collaboration and how teachers perceive collaboration. So we have some survey measures that we use at the beginning and end of units to be able to assess that, as well as some exit tickets that we use to get much more fine-grained, close-in measures of kids' experience of the units. And then the last piece, which I think you said this, their performances, right, Chris? So people are producing solutions to problems that they've designed over the course of the units. So we have some performance tasks, we call them transfer tasks, but they also include tasks where kids go back to the framing problem and come up with a solution using those applications. And we're still at the beginning phases of really testing those out in classrooms. We tested a bunch out in the spring and are beginning to look at those data. And I'm really excited because for school districts, the payoff is in terms of STEM learning, right? It's more the content learning outcomes. But those content learning outcomes are not going to be measured on any state test right now. So we're having to do a lot of assessment development right now and also convince teachers of the potential value of those assessments, again, when they're not in the standards. So one of the ways that we really tried to align to standards is through focusing on the NGSS engineering design practices and really making sure our units are aligned to that and also that our assessments are aligned to the NGSS design standards for middle and soon to be high school too.
So as usual, we're running out of time before we're running out of things to talk about, but it's been terrific to have the three of you as part of this. And I just quickly, what would you say to teachers and school administrators and educational leaders who are listening to this episode and might want to know, well, where do I go from here? Are there ways that the Institute can help me if I want to start doing some of these things?
Well, first off, if you want to be involved in with COBE, I highly recommend that you do. I think it's a wonderful project that the ISAT has done, and you'll learn about computational thinking first through sensor immersion, and then next through using their self-driving car unit. So if teachers are interested in that, just getting back to what I would, if I had a chance to say to admins, is let the kids play with it, right? They're doing it anyways. And so just let them play with it, and you'll be astounded by some of the things that they use and do. And for teachers, why not save some time using some of the tools that can help you, right? And so the next thing that I hear all the time is that now with all these AI tools, teachers are not allowing kids to do anything computer related. They're actually making them write it down manually, right? And I think that's not where we want the this tool is here to stay, right? Is how do we get them to do that? And then next is the teachers are now focusing on cheating, right? Every time you think about AI, the first thing, English teachers and social studies teachers is talk about cheating. But if you take a look at, and if you read up on how these cheating tools work and how they detect something is cheating or not, is actually what good writing is about. And so you're actually doing yourself a disservice by not using these tools and just explaining to these kids like how these things work and how I want you to be a good writer. And then lastly, we have to teach them about critical thinking. And then in order to do that, you have to play with these tools and kind of break it apart to see where it's good and where it's not. So getting back to what Ethan Mullick says is the jagged frontier, right? We're now looking at the jagged frontier of learning and learning with AI. And in order to do that, we must play with it. We because we're all learning. And so that's all I have to say is just dive into it, as they would say.
Well, thanks again to the three of you for being part of this and for sharing the exciting work that's going on. Next week, we will take a break from Silver Lining for Learning to celebrate the start of fall. but please watch our website because we will have some very interesting episodes coming in October, including another one of the National AI Institutes being part of an episode. And to all of you, have a great week.